I am delighted to be welcoming you here to the 2022 Liberty in Our Lifetime conference. Welcome. My name is Peter Young, and I'm the Managing Director of the Free Cities Foundation. We're a not-for-profit organisation that is working to create a freer, fairer and more prosperous world. And our strategy for doing that is to support the development of what we call free cities. Free cities are autonomous territories adopting innovative policies to support human freedom. These are smaller places that are doing things differently in order to create societies that are not characterized by coercion or top-down control, but by voluntarism and free exchange. We're delighted to be hosting this conference today, and we're really excited about the program of speakers that we've got lined up for this event. In the next few days, we're going to hear from representatives of Free Cities projects, including some people from special legally autonomous zones like Prospera and Morazan in Honduras, some intentional communities like Guanaja Hills, Bürgergenossenschaft or small farm cities, and even some more adventurous projects like Atlas Island that are working to create independent communities on the high seas. Now, many of us have come to this conference because we suspect that in the countries in which we live, things are increasingly going in the wrong direction. We might feel that things are being monitored more than they should be, or that bureaucracy is stifling innovation, or that social problems are being exacerbated by the policies that aim to alleviate those very problems. Now, there are many organisations out there that share the concerns I've just mentioned, but are working to try and change existing structures like national governments, intergovernmental organisations, the global financial system and the education system. They see these structures that profoundly shape many aspects of our lives, and they try to change them from within. But the approach of the Free Cities Foundation is different. We see what we regard as a more fruitful and constructive path to creating positive change. Rather than trying to change the status quo by working within existing structures, we are working to build parallel structures. Systems that you can peacefully opt into that exist alongside the status quo. Because we are all peaceful people who love voluntarism. We don't want to impose our preferences on other people who may not have the same kind of desires that we do. But we do feel that we should be allowed to pursue a different path and show what a kind of positive future would be possible by adopting a different and more freedom-oriented model. So in the next 3 days, we're going to explore this theme: parallel structures for progress. Because free cities are an example of a parallel structure in governance. They're voluntary communities that people are free to move to and participate in, but no one is forced to be a part of. But alongside parallel structures in governance, as some of you may have seen from the program, there are also many other important structures out there. Structures like the education system, the financial system, law, dispute resolution. These are all structures that we're going to explore during the next 3 days of our program. Today's the first day, and we're going to hear some keynote speeches, and we're going to hear more on our theme, parallel structures. Tomorrow, we're going to see a showcase of some Free Cities projects. And then in the afternoon, we've got breakout sessions on more targeted elements of the program. Elements like education and governance, these structures that I've just mentioned that are so important to our lives. Law and dispute resolution. We've got a range of exciting talks taking place in here and Next Door that are going to explore all of those themes. And then on Sunday the 23rd, we focus on finance and money. Structures which I think many people in this room will agree somehow tie all of the others together. So I'm really pleased that you've all joined us here today. And I'm now delighted to introduce our next speaker and the first keynote speaker of the day. This is someone who's dedicated a huge amount of his life and effort and resources to realizing what I believe is the most practical way of creating freer and fairer and more prosperous societies, the Free Cities model. So I would invite you to join me in welcoming to the stage the Foundation Council President of the Free Cities Foundation, Dr. Titus Gebel.
One, two, 1, 2. Can you hear me? Okay. Wow, that's a big crowd. So this is the third conference we are holding to this topic. The first conference 2 years ago was purely internal. Foundation, our for-profit entity, Tipolis. Second conference last year in Switzerland had about 130 participants, the first public conference. And today it's 270, I've been told. So I hope we can double the people attending every year from now, because there's momentum for our case. More and more people are looking for places that are different to what they have because they are not satisfied any longer. And I want to elaborate a bit on why this is the case, why maybe we are heading in the wrong direction, and of course, what are the answers to that. The battle for political supremacy in the West has been decided. Let's be frank. The so-called progressive have won, and the so-called conservative and libertarians have lost. The march through the institutions, started by the misguided 1968 generation, has been successful, and their children and grandchildren are now at the helm. Eco-socialists, cultural Marxists, in short, Bolshevik ideas prevail in politics and culture, political administration, media, schools, universities, and increasingly even in business. At accelerating speed. If you have kept, like probably many here, the same center-left viewpoint over the remaining 20 years, you are probably considered far-right today. You might have seen this one, what was made popular by Elon Musk, where you see that if you just have remained where you were ever, you have moved from the left to the right, without doing anything about it. And a lot of people have experienced that. And the question is, why is this happening at that speed? In virtually all democratic states, there's a tendency for larger institutions or organizations to drift to the left over time. And this applies equally to TV stations, newspapers, political parties, state authorities, universities, and other associations. Why is this so? I think the explanation is twofold. First, if you like to create things or projects on your own, or prefer to work for making a living and then enjoying private life with your family, you are probably less inclined to join any of those institutions. On the other hand, if you like to manipulate other people and control them, you are very much inclined to join these institutions. The first position correlates somehow with conservative positions, the second rather with progressive positions. And precisely because the most fundamental characteristic of progressive ideas is that they do not work, progressives concentrate in institutions where ideas do not have to work in order to survive. And that is why progressives are disproportionately found in professions where economically measurable results do not have to be achieved. Thus, progressives are often media people, teachers, professors, politicians, or otherwise employed in government service or tax-funded NGOs. This has the additional effect that they can then use this position to agitate and discredit permanently while their victims are busy proving themselves on the market, earning their own living, and even supporting their progressive opponents through taxes. And the second reason is that conservatives and libertarians tend to be more tolerant or towards differing political positions. If someone is known as a lefty in their organization, mostly they would allow this person to remain. Not so with the progressives. They want to missionize and force all non-progressive fellow citizens, whom they consider either unenlightened or bribed, to a happiness defined by them. Progressives only give a position in an organization to those who have the same worldview and kick out dissenters by all means. I've seen this over and over again in the last 30 years. And this is how it has been going on for decades in newsrooms, broadcasting stations, universities, and authorities. Whoever is not of their opinion is defamed, suppressed, slandered. As a result, most of these institutions have been irreparably destroyed and can no longer be reformed with reasonable effort. Unless you can mobilize $50 billion like Elon Musk. Well, then you can take over Twitter, for example, but it will still be difficult, and we will see it in the upcoming months and years, to turn the platform into a beacon of freedom of speech as he planned. That's because virtually all the workforce tends politically to the left. Of all Silicon Valley companies, I think the least left is Oracle with 70% for the Democratic Party, and Twitter is 98% to 2%, right? And so good luck with turning Twitter into a beacon of freedom of speech, because the majority of these people, of course not all left, but the majority of these people are convinced they are on the right and fighting for a good cause. So Musk's attempt to allow dissent will be sabotaged. Musk will have to replace large parts of the workforce to change this in the long term. And accordingly, we could take over a major daily newspaper or TV station with a few $1 billion, but then would have to fire at least 80% of the journalists and make sure that non-progressive junior journalists are hired who are about as common as four-leaf clovers. Or in universities, replace 80% of professors and the academic middle class. Comparable things apply to administrations, including the leadership of the armed forces and police, the courts, and practically all educational institutions. That's a tough call. Reform in the sense of freedom-oriented policy are not impossible, but extremely difficult, and they will probably be watered down because existing sensitivities have to be taken into account. We have to keep in mind that every new generation of students is released into the voting age even more ideologized, thus producing more and more streamlined voters who are no longer reachable by argumentation and who even are not willing to expose themselves to competing arguments. And they learn that the state solves all their problems. And unfortunately, only a minority is able to break out of this framework by own efforts of thought, like the people in this room. Now I'm asking you, why should we force people to be happy against their will? It makes us unpopular and them angry. Those who refuse for life to become adults, that means self-responsible individuals, shouldn't they bear the consequences themselves? And the consequences will be serious. One only has to keep in mind that today almost everything that the mainstream, the woke mainstream claims, and that is more or less absorbed by the people, is wrong. And the politics based on it will therefore inevitably fail. Let me give you some examples. For example, the idea that an industrialized country can only be supplied with wind power and solar energy. Or the conviction that the world population can be fed with organic food without any fertilizers and pesticides. Or the idea that one can impose all kinds of planned economic requirements on the economy without any major loss of prosperity. The idea that one can increase the money supply at will without triggering massive inflation sooner or later. The complete refusal to subject drastic measures to a harm-benefit analysis, for example, measures against COVID or climate change or sanctions against Russia. The idea that men and women are social constructs and that there are more than two genders. The conviction that all people are exactly the same and can perform all tasks equally well with the appropriate education. The idea of preventing or sanctioning free speech for an alleged good cause. And I could go on and on and on and on. Errors accumulated over decades now add up to a veritable delusion and inevitably to a downfall. Because you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. You might have heard or seen this before, but this is exactly the situation we are facing at the moment. So my message is, the small number of advocates of freedom, us, should not waste their energy. Another advocate. The small number of advocates of freedom should not waste their energy on trying to change systems from within that can no longer be repaired. The drastic cure is rather total and irrevocable failure, learning through pain. Only this will drive the eco-socialist insanity out of people's mind to some extent. This cup must now be finished to the end. This is not an easy medicine, I know that, as many people will suffer as a result, including those who saw the disaster coming and warned in time. But this is unfortunately the only way to achieve a sustainable change in thinking and thus a turning away from statist collectivism and towards personal responsibility, which by all means also includes caring for others. The opposite of political collectivism is not selfish individualism, it is self-determination. And this is a concept beyond left or right. And the main insight is, or will be hopefully, there is no right to live at the expense of others. Comes with a caveat. Of course, we can and should feel morally obliged to help people who cannot help themselves, especially amongst friends and family. And of course, we can take over respective contractual obligations like we do in a marriage. But there is no human right to sue unrelated others for providing you a living. And I found no big scholar, so you have to take care. I quote myself. But this insight is crucial for a peaceful future beyond an all-powerful state. So let me work it out a bit. It might be a bit strong for some people. So over time, what happened? Over time, instead of limiting human rights to liberty, the well-intentioned have added more and more so-called participation rights. These include rights such as the right to work, the right to free education, the right to humane existence with housing, clothing, medical care, satisfactory remuneration, and so on. This sounds all good, but what is completely lacking here is the understanding that these rights can only be asserted at the expense of third parties and only by an all-powerful state. They are in direct conflict with the human right to liberty. If I cannot afford a humane apartment, then somebody else has to pay for it. Who enforces this against whom? And who decides what constitutes a humane existence? As things stand, this can only be the state, which thereby intervenes in the property rights and freedom of action of its citizens. In other words, the fundamental liberty rights originally conceived as a right of defense against the state are transformed now into the opposite, powers of intervention which the state has against its citizens and which cannot or must not defend themselves against them. It is therefore not surprising that the existence of participation rights has become a constant cause of struggle for distribution, endless political struggles. And the recent idea of a universal basic income is only the logical consequence of believing that you have the right to live at the expense of others without having to pay anything in return. This does not add up, of course, because ultimately it can only be at the expense of those who generate surpluses that can then be taken away from them. And this will discourage those people. And finally, the state will have to force them to work in order to earn the basic income for the others. In another context, this configuration is called slavery. Rights at the expense of third parties are in truth privileges. They are an aberration that causes considerable discord. Properly understood, there's only one essential human right, namely the right to be left alone, in order to be able to lead one's self-determined life. And all other human rights are either legitimate derivatives thereof or illegitimate privileges at the expense of others. Only when these insights have been internalized can a new era dawn. Otherwise, after the downfall, there will be only a lukewarm reform by moderate professional politicians, which will lead to the fact that a few years later, the very forces that caused the mess will be in charge again, as we have seen in the German Democratic Republic. The very people in communist parties, many of them are now in charge of German administration. Okay, now for some good news. The good news is that freedom-oriented persons, be they libertarian, classical liberal, conservative, or whatever, do not have to wait idly for this collapse, which also can mean a long decline instead of a big bang. Instead, parallel structures can be set up immediately. The big advantage is that you don't need a majority to do it, and that you can make an immediate difference by yourself. After all, successful structures, parallel structures, have a role model effect that will come to full fruition when the existing systems fail more and more, what is happening now. Admittedly, there's a disadvantage to this. You actually have to do something about it, namely get out of your comfort zone. It won't be enough just to write know-it-all articles or comments in the online media, or to participate in petitions and demonstrations. You have to create something new based on your own actions, and that is exhausting. But in return, a meaningful existence beckons, namely creating the seed for a better and above all freer world. Even if it's not completely successful in our lifetime, the seed is sown for future generations. And really, everyone can participate and everyone is needed. Here's an example. The Free State Project in New Hampshire started with the idea early in 2001. And the plan was, we move all to New Hampshire, which we have identified as the most suitable states for libertarian and freedom-minded people, if we have gained 20,000 interested people and they have signed up online to do that move. It took 15 years to reach that level, and then out of the 20,000, only 3,000 really moved. That was very disappointing to many, and many people have went away from the Free State Project. But now, according to their own count, they have over 6,000 and more coming. So they have already doubled. Some say it's even we are 12,000. And they have already 45 free staters, as they call themselves, elected as state representatives. And my guess is this number will increase over the next years exproportionally, and we will see an acceleration in that process. So 15 years, nothing happens, and then disappointing outcome can still become, we are not there yet, right? And I know some people are critical about the project, but hey, my message is, and I have no shares in the project, just an example. These people have tried it. Maybe if they fail, hey, who cares? At least they tried, and they're still working on it. And I can only encourage you to take this example and don't be discouraged if something fails after a few years. There is a possibility to build on what you have already achieved and try it again. And I think this is a success after all. And we will see how they develop. Peter and I are planning to have somebody from the project at least next year here, right? If they are still alive, but I'm sure they are. Unlike the other side, such undertakings happen at our own expense and in recognition of reality and not of delusional narratives. And they are accompanied by the willingness to face the competition of ideas and systems. Because only this pressure of competition and voluntary participation, permanently stable and anti-fragile systems can be established. Whoever relentlessly evaluates himself or herself and their situation gains serenity over the present, which, as hard as it may be, nevertheless confronts us with selectable options for action. And conversely, those who do not want to make this cognitive effort deserve only the status quo. The progressive regime bases its power primarily on absolute domination of the media, the cultural sector, central banks, and educational institutions. So these are the areas in particular candidates for the creation of parallel structures, along with complete alternative systems of living together. And this is what we want to discuss in the upcoming days. In particular, we are focusing on parallel structures in governance, finance, and education. What they have in common, and should continue to have in common, is not to focus on reforming existing systems, but to make them obsolete through better models. What is at stake is nothing less than the creation of parallel societies and parallel elites. And before we go to the three areas, let me shortly strive on media and culture. The media domination has, of course, not gone unnoticed by critical minds, and so, thanks to the internet, countless new media have emerged with widely varying quality, and including alternative social media. And there are even journalists who have managed as single persons to attract 1 million audience, bigger than CNN and others, just on the strength on the quality and impartiality of their work, such as Joe Rogan in the US or Boris Reitschuster in Germany. Single persons, 1 million audience just by their work. This is possible. And they are flanked by numerous bloggers who tirelessly bring new points of view and facts to light. And the former gatekeepers, of course, are now striking back with attempts to technical and legal censorship. But the genie will not go back into the bottle, and that is good. We have new libertarian heroic figures in books, like Charles Knight or Karl Brun, and they have what it takes to reach broad audiences. In the case of a film adaptation, you could even create new cult series. I don't know if you have heard about that, but I recommend reading. There's a whole series of the High Ground from Doc Casey, John Hunt, speculator, assassin, drug lord. We have the German version, a Swiss agent, Karl Brun. And 2 years ago, the Free Cities Foundation made a story contest how life in a free private city could look like. And we received more than 100 contributions, and a book resulted from this, which we presented for the first time during this conference. This is this in the middle, Road to Liberty. And I know that some of the authors are here, and thank you again for your contribution. Also in the film and music sector, so many artists have been cancelled in the meantime, at least in Europe, that it's easier by the day to find one who actively participates in the construction of an alternative counterculture instead of submissively crawling back into the woke herd. And by the way, it is also for cultural reasons that we have set up a dress code for this conference. Why dressing up well at all? Well, firstly, to show respect to the organizers and the speakers. And secondly, to show respect to your fellow attendants. And thirdly, to show the ability to make a minimum effort of self-discipline. The latter is especially important for people like us who want to make the world a better place. As the saying goes, clothes make the man. And this comes without further explanation. English football fans in the 1930s and today. Education. In order to protect our children from brainwashing, we urgently need parallel structures in education. Keep in mind that in many countries, even homeschooling is forbidden. Luckily, in this field have always been alternative offerings, and numerous new ones are emerging. We will learn about them in the conference. Even completely new non-woke universities like the University of Austin in Texas, with Niall Ferguson and others promoting their big names. So in this sector, too, many approaches are likely to fall, especially those that dispense with knowledge transfer and performance measurements. But such a selection process is something quite normal in a new market. Only through trial and error and imitation and duplication of successful models can a better system be created. And this is how evolution works. Nothing wrong with that. Tomorrow we will learn about exciting initiatives for parallel systems in education. And as everywhere, competition stimulates business. I have a proposal too. For an alternative school education, historic human development should be taken as a yardstick, in addition to the classical curriculum, and children be taught not only the knowledge, but also the appropriate skills, at least the basics, staggered according to age group, with increasing degree of difficulty, starting with making fire, building a wall, sewing clothes, up to metallurgical and computer-based processes. Then young people with the appropriate education would not only be capable of survival and have self-confidence on the basis of the work of their own hands, would be also able to understand from their own experience why the world is where it is today, especially in technology and technological and economic terms. The litmus test for true education, in my view, must be, suppose you were transported by time machine back to the Stone Age or the Middle Ages. Could you teach the people anything meaningful? Finance. In finance, parallel structures are the most advanced. The monopoly of state money and central banks has already been broken by Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The importance of this cannot be overstated. Basically, this fulfills Hayek's call to take the monopoly of money away from governments so that we don't keep running into currency disasters every couple of decades. I don't believe we shall ever have good money again before we take it out of the hands of governments. Friedrich Hayek, Bitcoin, mission accomplished. Not fully, but we're going there. So anyone who can pay directly from person to person without having to ask permission from intermediaries, such as banks, is naturally a danger to the regime. This is especially true in times when unwelcome critics regularly have their bank account terminated. I told you about Boris Reitschuster, who is really has millions of followers and audience, and he was a journalist for a German magazine in Russia for many years, and he's a big enemy of Putin since many years. That didn't help him. They canceled all his bank accounts just because he's asking critical questions to politicians. That's the world of today. So therefore, we can still expect a fierce battle here with efforts to ban Bitcoin under the disguise of saving energy. It is precisely the energy crisis that can be used by the very establishment responsible for it to ban unwelcome parallel currencies like Bitcoin. Sadly, probably to the applause of the masses. But this genie is out of the bottle too and will not be pushed back completely. Even if Bitcoin will be banned in many countries, it will not be banned everywhere, and there are enough successors and variants, including gold-backed payment systems. So especially tomorrow and on Sunday, we will learn about all the amazing options that an existing parallel structure like Bitcoin can bring us. It gives us the first rough idea what parallel structures are capable of. The most difficult issue is the creation of new systems of living together. That is, new political or social orders, of course. Current political systems are characterized by false incentive for both the rulers and the governed. The rulers are not liable and have no economic disadvantages if they make bad decisions. The governed are led to believe that they can vote free benefits into their pockets. This politicizes the state's monopoly on force and leads to constant changes in the so-called social contract. The result, I said it before, is a constant struggle to influence these changes in a particular direction. Penetration of this market is particularly difficult because it usually requires secession, revolution, or at least winning election. Again, however, there are parallel structures that are easier to accomplish. I have already proposed a peaceful and voluntary alternative, free private cities. A free private city is characterized by the fact that it is organized by a for-profit company, the city operator, who acts as a government service provider. This operator may also be partially or wholly owned by the citizens. In this capacity, the operator guarantees its citizens the protection of life, liberty, and property. The services provided by the operator include internal and external security, a predefined legal and regulatory framework, and an independent dispute resolution system. And the participation is 100% voluntary and can be stopped at any time. And interested individuals and companies enter into a citizen's contract with the operator and pay a fixed annual fee for these services instead of taxes. Within this framework, a spontaneous order can develop, resulting from the voluntary activities and decisions of citizens. The operator cannot later unilaterally change the citizen's contract without the consent of the citizens concerned. That's the biggest difference to the systems of today. Disputes between citizens and the operator are heard by external arbitration tribunals, as it is common in international law. If the operator ignores the arbitration awards or abuses its power, its customers leave and it faces insolvency. So if you're interested in the details, please have a look at my white paper, which is distributed at the booth of the Free Cities Foundations for free. Can free private cities ever become a reality? Well, since all land is currently controlled by governments, the establishment of a free private city requires the operator to enter into a contractual agreement with an existing state. In this agreement, the host nation grants the operator the right to establish the free private city on a certain territory under certain conditions, which include legal autonomy in various areas. States may be willing to relinquish some of their power in exchange for promised benefits. These include, for example, job creation, foreign investment, and a share in the profits generated by the operator. The existence of a large number of special economic zones around the world demonstrates the willingness of countries to go this path in principle. So we do have a chance. That's because people don't want to be subjugated by rules and regulations that they have not consented to. People don't want to pay for things they have not ordered, and reasonable people don't need hundreds or thousands of laws to live peacefully together. People need a safe space where they can congregate and cooperate peacefully, but are otherwise left alone by coercive authorities. And free private cities can deliver these human desires. The existing political systems cannot. It is for this reason that free private cities have a chance to succeed, since eventually people will go where they are treated best. Admittedly, it is not an easy path, and even in countries open to it, it requires years of negotiations and legislative changes. Nevertheless, it must be taken. Me and others are working on it. And comparable models, not only Free Private City. The Free Cities Foundation is covering a variety of models, and the Free Private City is only one of them. And the first emerging economies like Honduras have embarked on it. Further projects in Africa and Central America are in the pipeline. However, in Honduras, the empire is striking back already after an election victory of the socialists. The irony is that the politicians who want to get rid of the most innovative forms of governance in the world, the Honduran Cedes, call themselves progressive. And be it as it is, there's momentum there, and there's now a free city movement around the world that wants to try out alternative forms of governments, be it prosperity zones, charter cities, network states, or intentional communities without legal but with factual autonomy. And we will hear today and tomorrow about what is happening with the Honduran Cedes, where seasteading stands, and what other autonomous zones and communities are in the making. I am proud that there is no other place in the world where you can learn so much about such initiatives than at this conference, and I hope that we will get something out of it that will make a difference in the real world. Thank you very much.